I have been a ranger in the USFS for almost 15 years, but this takes place about 3 years after I joined. We were getting calls about a lone wolf with a collar hanging around campsites, which was pretty weird since wolves aren't known to be in the area. But when you work in the field long enough, you start to realize that anything is possible. No calls had mentioned violent behavior from the animal though, thank God. I departed from the station around noon to check out the places that had been sighted. I wandered around for about 3 hours, and no further calls during that time, until I took a break for water, sat down, had a snack, and I was getting ready to go out again when I saw the thing about 20 feet out, trotting near the tree line. It seemed friendly enough, and it had the collar on, so I whistled to it and he came over to me. Once I got a closer look, I could see it wasn't a wolf. It was huge, but it was dark and it didn't have the right body structure, though I could definitely see why it would be confusing from a distance. I radioed it in and I reported that I had the dog with me, but as soon as I said I'd bring it in, the dog took off on me. Like he was playing to see how far he could get me to chase him. Typical dog behavior. I went after it and I swear it was a game of chase for at least 5 minutes as we steadily ran through the forest. Please don't go running through the woods, by the way, unless you know the area like the back of your hand. The dog finally slowed down near a rock bed creek area and started pacing around a spot. I drew in closer and I didn't see anything off at first. Then I noticed it. The overgrowth had almost disguised what happened to be bones. I called it in immediately and another team was sent to recover the remains. When I went to retrieve the dog, he was just gone. But honestly, it wasn't a priority at that point. He was friendly enough and I figured we'd catch up with him later. The bones were identified as a teenage male's and we are pretty sure he died in a hunting accident, but there's no way to know for sure. I'm just going to leave that up for grabs, but the point was that this poor boy was dead and he had been for quite some time all alone. He'd been reported missing in the area long before I became a ranger, and there had been pretty much no hope of finding him. I spoke to his mom on the phone. She called to thank me personally, and she asked how I'd found her son. I mentioned the dog, and after I gave a couple of details, she quietly explained that her son, who struggled with making connections, had sunk in a deep depression after the death of his best friend. I think it's beautiful that the dog led me to him. And it's amazing I chased it down without giving up, because honestly, it was running pretty fast and I about lost him many times before I really lost him in the end. I think I spent the rest of the day stunned. I continue to be in disbelief in a way, but I know what happened. My name is Thomas. I'm 28 and I have been a park ranger for years, and my job has always had its share of challenges and scares. But there's one night that stands out, an encounter that still chills me to the bone. It was late autumn and I was doing my routine night patrol in an extremely remote area of the national park that I still work at this very day. The darkness pressed in around me, with only the beam of my flashlight cutting through the black. The air was filled with the scent of damp leaves, and the sounds of the night echoed through me. I had an eerie feeling that someone was watching me. I just had this indescribable feeling inside. I stopped, sweeping my flashlight across the trees and bushes. There was no one in sight, but the feeling persisted. Nonetheless, I continued my patrol. Not too long after that was when I heard footsteps coming from up ahead. A sound distinct from the normal woodland noises, though. I directed my flashlight toward the source of the sound, and there, lurking, was a man. He was disheveled, wearing tattered clothing, and his eyes had an unsettling appearance. It was clear he had been out in the woods for some time. I asked him what he was doing in the park at this hour, and he gave me a vague, mumbled response about hiking, but his behavior raised red flags, and I radioed for backup. As I waited for my backup to arrive, I kept my distance from the man but tried to engage him in conversation. He was evasive and providing conflicting stories about his intentions and destination. The sense of unease continued to gnaw at me, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to this stranger. My backup arrived and we began questioning the man, really trying to figure out what the hell was going on. It soon became clear that he was not just a lost hiker. He hesitated to provide identification and seemed on edge. His gaze was darting around as if he was looking for an escape route. We decided to run a background check on him and detained him, so we didn't have to worry about him running away or anything crazy like that. What we discovered next I never imagined would happen in a million years, and it's the exact reason why I also go with my gut as an officer. The man had recently escaped from a nearby prison, where he had been serving a life sentence for the murder of 3 women from the late 90s. The thought that a convicted murderer was standing before us deep in the wilderness was horrifying. With this revelation, the man's demeanor completely changed. He became agitated and aggressive, realizing that his cover was blown. He made a desperate attempt to flee, and my fellow ranger and I had to physically pick him up and put him in the back of the cab. And we took him right back to where he came from. Apparently he was out on foot for 3 days, and we were the ones to catch him. We heard about someone a few counties away escaping a nearby prison, but that was hours away, so I guess we never really expected for us to run into him. The relief that washed over us was immense after all of this, but it was mixed with a disturbing realization of how close we had come to a potentially deadly encounter. The man was armed with multiple knives and makeshift weapons, and I'm grateful it didn't come down to him trying to use them on us. This night really served as a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk out in the depths of the wilderness and the unknown. No matter how much you think you know a place, in the deep woods, it's hard to say. Every once in a while, you run into something that you'll never expect, and this is a prime example of that. The forest, once a place for peace and beauty, had become the backdrop for a chilling encounter that would stay with me forever. Hi there, I'm Samantha, and I was a park ranger for 6 years. I won't specify where, as I don't want to get in trouble. One of the people I worked with told me to read the other park ranger stories here on Reddit, so I thought I'd give it a shot, and it's pretty nice to see someone being honest. It inspired me to share one of my own stories. People need to know what happens in these woods. I quit my job a couple years ago. I couldn't deal with having to bottle up all the things I've seen. Nobody wants to talk about them, but I feel like I'm drowning in the memories of it all, so I'm going to share them. I hope this raises some awareness of the true danger of the deep woods and makes people consider their safety. This was my first ever weird experience as a junior ranger. To this day, I still don't know what I saw, but I know it wasn't friendly. I had just received a call about screams coming from deep in the forest, off one of the more popular trails. This really wasn't all that unusual. If you've ever heard a mountain lion before, you know it kind of sounds like a woman screaming. So just as I was about to set off with my chief, we set off making small talk, and I was obviously trying to suck up a little bit. We were joking around, and he made a quick remark and said something about making sure that I take even these small jobs seriously, because you'll never know what you'll find, and that was some of the most valuable advice I'd ever gotten from someone on this job, because I learned my lesson from not listening to it. But that's a different story. We get to the area where the call was and begin north of the trail where the noise had been heard. We hear the screams ourselves, and it sounded like a mountain lion like I said, but something sounded really off about it. But we kept walking towards it anyways. We were about 10 minutes into walking when all of a sudden, it was like all the sound had been sucked from the woods. It was dead silent. I couldn't even hear my own breathing. I thought maybe I'd gone deaf, but I look at my chief and he had the same nervous expression on his face as I did. But by the way he was reacting, it felt as if he had dealt with something similar before, which I know now to be true. Just as quick as the silence came, I started to hear this low buzzing sound, but it wasn't just buzzing. I could feel the vibration of it in my whole body, so much so that my ears and jaws started to hurt. I can only describe it as if when you are getting your teeth drilled at the dentist. Even my vision started to vibrate, and as that happened, I swear I saw this black figure, about 7 feet tall, step out from a few trees in front of me. And it started with that same scream as it bent down and began to crawl towards us. As anyone would, I freaked the heck out, and I stepped back to start running. My chief grabs my arm very hard, just as I start to sprint, almost knocking me over. He puts his other arm around me and holds my arms very tight as he begins to walk with me out of the forest. Just as I'm about to put up a fight and tell him to freaking run, he says in a very calm voice, "Don't run, don't talk, don't look back, just keep walking." And I did exactly what he said. He knew something I didn't know, and as much as I wanted to run, I didn't want to push it. That 10-minute walk was excruciating because I knew it was crawling behind us by the sound of the buzzing in the back of my head. I wanted to run so bad. Eventually, I think it ran away in a different direction because after a while, all the noise in the forest came back and the buzzing stopped. And I had this weird amount of relief, like this feeling of euphoria in my chest after I started to feel safe. So we get back on the trail and I'm shaking though. I was in so much shock I couldn't even cry. I started feeling like I was crazy and I was screaming at him, asking what the hell that was, and he says, and yes, I remember word for word what he said. "There are things in these woods that have been here longer than us that we can't explain or get rid of. If you don't think you can handle that, you should pack your bags now." Then he kept walking, and I walked a little bit behind him, trying to shake that horrible feeling, and I tried to find a reasonable answer for what just happened. I truly loved my job, and when it was good, it was really good. I met some amazing people, and I love nature. But in the end, the bad experiences outweighed the good, and I had to leave. I know this experience doesn't sound all that scary, but trust me, if you were there, you might understand. Living through it was definitely much scarier than listening to the story or reading it in words. I love to hear other people's experiences with the woods. I've learned that what I saw may have been a cryptid or a wendigo, something along those lines. I've been a park ranger for a good number of years, and I've had my fair share of close encounters with wildlife and even creepy people in the deep woods. Yet there's one night that still stands as the creepiest and most disturbing, despite all the other instances. Thinking about it even sends chills down my spine, and it has nothing to do with the supernatural, just to let you know. It was a dark and moonless night in the heart of a remote national park. It's a beautiful place, and this is where the story takes place. I was miles away from civilization, and I was on my usual night patrol, armed with a flashlight and a radio. As time was ticking, it was getting later, and I noticed something odd. It was a rank, musky odor that hung in the air. I recognized it immediately, or at least I thought I did. It smelled like a carcass, and I don't know why, but my first thought was that it was a grizzly bear. This realization sent me into a fit of anxiety, as I knew that grizzlies were known to be quite aggressive when they felt threatened. Maybe it wasn't dead, or maybe it was something else that was dead. Or maybe I'm about to walk into the aftermath of what a grizzly bear does to its prey. I really hoped not, but I hoped more that the bear was no longer around. I cautiously took a few more steps and looked around my area, keeping my flashlight on, scanning my surroundings for any signs of the bear. It was unnerving to think that there could be a bear around me lurking somewhere in the darkness, just beyond the reach of my beam of light. I suppose it could be anything else, but I just had this weird feeling inside that I needed to be worried. My heart raced as I heard rustling in the brush beside me, and then a low growl. It was close, like way too close for comfort. I aimed my flashlight in the direction of the sound, and there, mere yards away, stood a massive grizzly bear, its eyes reflecting back from the beam of my flashlight. I knew I had to keep calm. I slowly raised my radio to call for backup, but my trembling fingers made it difficult to operate it. The bear stared at me, its growl intensifying, and I could see its powerful muscles tense, ready to charge. My mind raced, and I knew I had to do something to avoid dying in these woods. I backed away as slowly and quietly as I could, never taking my eyes off the bear, and I was kind of trying to calm it down. The fear that surged through me was almost suffocating, but as I retreated, I couldn't help but notice something else unsettling. The way the bear moved seemed strangely coordinated and deliberate. Not the erratic behavior of a wild animal. It was as if it were stalking me, keeping a careful distance, and mirroring my every step. My heart was pounding and my imagination ran wild. All I could think about was how I may never be able to see my family again. I finally managed to radio for help, and my buddy on the other end reassured me that backup was on its way. but the bear continued to follow me, maintaining a menacing presence. It was as if it was playing a game of cat and mouse with me. When my fellow rangers finally arrived, the bear retreated into the darkness. After all three of us yelled at it and managed to scare it off. It left me completely shaken up, and I'm pretty sure I almost had a legit heart attack. After a minute of calming my nerves and catching my breath, everything was fine. I barely escaped death. I could tell that thing was hungry and was genuinely debating on eating me. I would be lying if I said this still doesn't haunt me to this day, leaving me with a lingering sense of dread whenever I'm patrolling at night by myself.